Hi, so I decided to do the first video comparing local education versus private education versus overseas education. Local education, I'm going to assume that you're interested in University of Malaya, UKM, or USM. Private, I'm going to assume that you're interested in maybe Sunway or Taylor's or Wollongong, Nottingham, Reading, all pretty good universities in Malaysia. And for overseas, I'm going to assume that you're interested in UK or US. I'll be using US as an example because I currently study in an American university. Let's go into the first one, which is local universities. But before I begin, I just want to say that what I'm about to say in terms of the pros and cons is my personal opinion. And I believe that since you're already in this group, it means that you are very hardworking and you're motivated and you're very driven, and that you will be able to succeed even if you're in a local university, even if you're in a private, even if you're in an overseas university, right? I'm assuming that because you're so hardworking and because you believe that you can do it, you can probably succeed in any environment. But assuming that you don't, assuming that you're like the general population, this is what I think are the pros and cons for studying in local universities. Firstly, I think the pros of studying in local universities is that it's very cheap and you get good education. My friends who study in mostly medicine and engineering, they get very good education. Malaysia's medicine field is definitely one of the best. You can see how well we're handling the coronavirus. And if you're studying medicine, I definitely recommend right? But if you're studying something in engineering, is also one of the best universities in the world, and it's also very cheap. You get to study a full degree in less than 10,000 ringgit. But if you study universities in the US, you have to spend like $50,000 a year, so that's like almost 1 million ringgit just to get a degree, and that's a lot of money. So those are the pros for studying local. The cons, the disadvantages of studying in local universities is that number one, I think that you're not really learning anything. I personally come from SPM, and then when I went to IB and I did American University Education, the things that I'm learning right now and the kind of methods that I'm using to learn and tackle examinations and projects is like completely different compared to how I studied in SPM. Instead SPM, all I did was just pick up a book and just memorized everything, and I got like full A's. I didn't have to think, I didn't have to really innovate, I didn't really have to do anything aside from just memorizing. And I would argue that local universities are the same. You don't really think outside of the box. People don't really do presentations or projects, and even if they do, it's very like you don't really learn a lot. It's very how do I say? You just basically don't learn a lot, in my opinion. And secondly, because of that, because you don't learn a lot in university, I don't think it prepares you for the real world. I don't think that companies in Malaysia are very interested in local university students compared to overseas university students. And there are reasons behind that. It's because in overseas, you study and you learn and you basically develop many skills that you wouldn't have if you stay in Malaysia. And employers know that, companies know that students from overseas tend to be better suited for the workforce, because if you're in a local university, you're not really challenged, you're not really forced to think outside of the box, and so you don't really get prepared for the real world. And lastly, the third reason why I think local universities are not that good is because the majority of the students are not really dreamers and they don't really think outside of the box. And university is really the most important 3 or 4 years of your life. You could get like 10 Bs in SPM, no one really cares. As long as you work hard in university, you can become someone very important or successful in the workforce, because university really is where you meet friends that end up staying your friends forever. And you want to surround yourself with people that can make you into a better person. And local universities don't really have that kind of mindset. Many people in local universities, and again, I'm generalizing, right? There are many smart students in local universities. I have many friends in local universities that are very smart, way smarter than I am. But I think generally, people in local universities tend to be very like macam kotak, and they don't really think about things outside of the box, and that makes them very, very boring. And let's move to private universities. So I'm gonna use Taylor's as an example. I have a lot of friends in Taylor's, and I think the pros of studying in Taylor's is that it's very international, right? You have a lot of people from all around the world, and also the Malaysians there, Malay, Chinese, Indians, they all speak relatively better English. And I'm not saying that English is very important, but Malaysia is a developing country, and as we develop, we need to use more English. And if you want to learn English, and if you don't think that you've learned a lot of English in high school, chances are you're not going to learn any English when you're in university, if you go to USM or UM, because you're just going to be around the same kind of people as in high school. But if you go to private universities like Reading or Southampton or Taylor's, you're going to be exposed to a very different kind of environment. People there are going to speak a lot more English, people there are going to be from different countries, and you're going to be able to adapt, and you're going to be able to be more of an outside of the box thinker. So the second reason why I think that private universities are good is because of the kind of like projects and presentations that you have to do. You have to do a lot more presentations and projects, and again, projects and presentations are where you actually learn and where you actually apply what you learn in the books in real life. And the more often you do that, the better you get, and the better you get, the higher chances of you succeeding in life, regardless of whatever you want to do. Thirdly, and this kind of goes into what happens after graduation, I feel that firms, like companies, prefer private university students over local university students, because there's just a general understanding that private universities are more in sync with what are the demands of the market. If you study in Taylor's University or Sunway, they understand what employers like Sunway Property Group or Genting Group or Maybank or like CIMB Bank, they understand what these companies are looking for, and they try their best to make sure that the curriculum fits what they're looking for. But that doesn't really mean that you won't be getting good jobs if you study in local universities, because again, if you study engineering or medicine in UM, then you're definitely a better candidate than an engineering student in Taylor's. So again, this is not really the strongest point, but generally, private university students in Malaysia are more appealing to the workforce. And now to the cons of private education in Malaysia, because I think that the cons are very, very important in private universities in Malaysia. Number one is that it's expensive. Like personally, I'm on scholarship, right? I have a full scholarship and I'm currently studying for free, and everything is covered. When I finished SPM and I was considering studying in Taylor's, I looked at the fees and it was so expensive. Like I wouldn't be able to afford Taylor's University. And that's saying something, because private education is very, very expensive in Malaysia. And unless you think that the pros that I mentioned, which are a more international environment, an emphasis on projects and presentations, and being more attractive to international firms, if you don't think that these three reasons are the reasons you want to study in Taylor's or Sunway, then I would highly recommend you to reflect on why do you want to study in a private education. Because if you want to study in Taylor's because people there are more cool and the girls there are cute and the guys there are like very handsome, then that's not really a good reason, because it's a very expensive place to be and you're going to be there for 4 years. So you want to make sure that you're willing to pay and you're willing to maybe take up PTPN loans to get that kind of quality education. And number two is I really don't think that private university education is for everybody. Some people just don't really fit well in private university education. I come from an SPM background, and when I go to see my friends in Taylor's University, a lot of them coming from international school backgrounds, I see the differences between a Taylor student who comes from SPM versus a Taylor student who comes from like A-levels, or not A-levels, but O-levels, or some kind of private education. If you don't think that you can adapt to an English-speaking, international, project-oriented environment, then I would really recommend you to rethink about why you want to study in a private education, because it is just not for everybody. You are going to be exposed to many different kinds of people in private education, well, education in general, but I've noticed that people in private universities, my friends in private universities compared to my friends in local universities. People in Sunway Taylors, they tend to be more outgoing. They go to clubs, they drink more, they're exposed to all kinds of bad stuff. And again, that depends on who you hang out with. But again, I'm saying that you have to really think about whether you think you're the best fit for these kinds of situations, right? And lastly, I'm going to be talking about overseas universities, American universities primarily. So the pros of studying in an overseas university is that I believe it pushes you to work smart. So if you go to education overseas, you can't really graduate with a 4.0 GPA by just studying and memorizing. You have to really understand the content, because university professors don't just give you like PowerPoints and print the notes out and just highlight everything for you like SPM. That's not going to happen. In university, they're going to give you thick books. Like, for example, let me see if I have a book here. I'm studying finance, and this is the book I have, and it is almost 1,000 pages. And my sister, who studies in a Malaysian university, is studying the same thing, but it's only 50 pages. So you don't really learn a lot if you're in a local universities compared to in an international university, because an international university would force you to really study smart. And that moves to the second point, which you become very employable. Employers really like it if you come from an overseas university background, because it shows that you've gone through a very rigorous academic process, and it shows that you got a 4.0 because you knew how to work smart, not just because you worked hard. And also, I think that studying in an overseas university teaches you a lot about adapting to different cultures. If you're studying in the US, you're going to be forced to understand the cultures in the US. You're going to be forced to eat American food, talk to Americans, learn about the American culture, speak American English. These are things that you have to learn, and if you adapt well, these are very, very useful skills to have in life. Because as Malaysia becomes a more developed country, you want to make sure that you stand out and you can offer something on the table. And that's something you get if you study overseas. But the cons is, of course, it is very, very expensive. Again, I mentioned before, but studying in, for example, NYU will cost you $80,000 a year. And that's going to be so much money at the end, and you're going to have so much debt, and it's just not worth it if you don't think that the pros outweigh the cons. A second con is that you might have homesickness. And I don't mean a day or a week or a month of homesickness. Some people go overseas for 4 years and they come back and they tell their parents that these were the worst 4 years of my life. Because again, some people are just not suited for overseas education. If you don't think that you can adapt, if you don't think that you can really break out of your shell and learn as much as possible, then maybe you shouldn't go overseas, because it's going to be very tough. And this goes into my third point, which is that it takes a lot of motivation to finish the journey on your own. In my university, I'm only one of the very few Malaysians on my campus, and because of that, I was forced to sort of be friends with people from different cultures. And it's not easy, because growing up all my life with Malaysians and all of a sudden forced to not be with Malaysians was very tough. And I personally was able to cope and overcome that obstacle. But if you don't, then you will end up having a very bad 4 years, because not only would you not be able to enjoy the 4 years, you might actually become more introverted, you might actually become less social, you might actually learn less if you went to a local university, because maybe you're just more suitable for a local university. So if I can kind of end this video with any concluding remarks, it's that I want you to really think about what kind of education you want. You know, take a piece of paper and write down what you want to study. Okay, maybe let's give you an example. For example, I wanted to study engineering for a very long time. So I remember a few years ago, I took a piece of paper and I said, okay, engineering in University of Malaya, one of the best schools in Asia, and it's very cheap. The cons of studying University of Malaya, the people there are gonna be like meh, not that special, and I'm just gonna be memorizing everything. So I was like, okay, how about studying petroleum engineering in Curtin University in Sarawak? The pros I wrote down that studying in Curtin University in Sarawak is that it's more international. I get to improve my English a lot more, and there's going to be a lot more emphasis on projects and presentations, and these are the kinds of things that I want to learn in university because that's why I am in university. But the cons is that I would have to take up a lot of loans and it will be too expensive, and I just don't think that the pros outweigh the cons. I thought to myself that if I were to study engineering and I got into I think that I would be able to study even on my own, and I will be able to learn a lot even on my own, and I would graduate with literally no debt compared to studying in Curtin University, where I might be able to get a slightly better education, but I graduate with like 100,000 ringgit worth of student loans, and that's just not worth it. But then when I was thinking of overseas education, the pros of studying overseas is just so high, but the only cons was that it's expensive. So I was thinking to myself, if there are so many pros of studying overseas and the only cons is that it's expensive, are there any solutions to sort of like erase that con? And it's just about getting scholarships. So I worked really hard. I figured out what is my strengths and what are my weaknesses, and I applied to a lot of scholarships and I got one. So this is the first video of many videos, and I hope that it kind of explains very briefly what I think about local versus private versus overseas. And again, this is very brief because I don't really know what you want to hear. So after this video, I want you to comment and tell me what you think about it, and tell me if you want me to talk about something more specific in local, something more specific in overseas, and then I can elaborate on that. But then I'm thinking for the next video that I'm going to be talking about scholarships, because I'm convinced that everyone should study overseas. I'm convinced that if you want the best education possible, you should go overseas and then come back to Malaysia, and you would become so much better in all senses. The only problem is about getting scholarships. So my second video after this one is going to be about how to get scholarships, how to prepare for scholarships, how to stand out in an interview, and how to make sure that you get that scholarship. So that's about it, and I hope you like this video.